Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer. It is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today, I wanted to put out a companion video for a series of videos that I'm putting out in the future on the Shaper Guardians. So this is the Guardian of the Minotaur, the Guardian of the Phoenix, the Guardian of the Chimera, and the Guardian of the Hydra. And I wanted to put out guides for each of those bosses, but I realized that I need to go through the map mods and the impacts that they'll have. One of the key things about the Shaper Guardians is that they're the hardest bosses in the game, with the possible exception of Core Malachi, maybe one or two other map bosses that can be nasty. They're the hardest bosses in the game that you encounter whilst under the impact of map mods. So what I've done is I've made a list of every single map mod that can roll and how relevant it is to the bosses. I want to go through that first and also point out where they have particular synergies with, for instance, the Minotaur or with, for instance, the Chimera. So, for instance, Hex Proof is a bit nastier, in my opinion, on the Minotaur than it is on the Phoenix. So let's go through them all, and I just want to start by defining a couple of things. A mod that I say is a trash mod only has an effect on the trash mobs in the zone. It doesn't affect the boss. A strategy wrecker is something that will ruin some build's day completely. A damage mod just makes the bosses hit harder, maybe makes the trash hit harder as well, but the bosses are what we're talking about here. Damage application doesn't make the boss hit harder necessarily, but makes the boss more likely to hit you. That can be anything from a larger area of effect to a faster attack speed on the boss. Damage application mods are no joke. They won't make you more likely to get one shot, but they will make you take a lot more damage. Combo mods are mods that don't do very much on their own, but that pose a serious threat when the wrong other mods roll with them. Durability mods make the boss harder to kill by increasing their hit points or some other method, and as a consequence prolong the boss fight. A longer boss fight means that there's more time to make critical mistakes, and it also means that some elements of the fight can get out of control. Durability mods have more of an impact on the Minotaur fight and the Phoenix fight than they do on the rest, in my opinion. The reason for this is that with the Chimera, even if you multiplied his hit points by 10, it wouldn't make much difference because the dangerous parts of that fight are the phases where the smoke phases and potentially the additional monster phases. The boss components, you can make mistakes and die while you're actually fighting the Chimera himself, but other than making big mistakes, you're just not in any real danger during those parts. The Hydra is a bit of a mix where there's more potential to make mistakes during the fight, but really it's the Minotaur where the zone can fill up with falling rocks, and it's the Phoenix in particular where the birds can get completely out of control, where durability mods matter more. Debuff mods have some effect that weakens your player that may not be immediately apparent how to categorize it, and crap on ground is just what it says. There is shit on the ground that does bad things to you if you stand in it. So it reduces your ability to move, reduces your ability to dodge the boss's attacks. Although in practice, you generally want to stand on the crap in the ground. The crap on the ground isn't so bad. There's 4 mods that are in that category. The crap on the ground isn't so bad that you wouldn't rather just stand in it than get hit by one of the boss's big hits. So nothing further to say, let's go through them all. Ceremonial, Antagonist, Anarchic, Skeletal, Capricious, Slithering, Undead, Eminent, Feral, Demonic, Bipedal, Solar, Lunar, Haunting, Feasting. All of these are population mods, and multifarious as well. All population mods, they affect the monsters that you encounter on the way to the boss. They have no effect on the boss fight. The only thing that they do is provide a little bit of bonus quantity for the boss so that you get more bad loot from the boss. You're here for the fragments mostly, and maybe the divination cards that the bosses drop, but you know, you'll take the extra quantity. It's not great, but it's something. Chaining. What chaining does, it adds two chains to the projectiles that monsters fire in the zone. This is a bit of a strategy wrecker and a damage application mod, and it has no effect at all on the Minotaur, but it has some modest effect on all the others. You'll see here that I've got green as a color for no or completely trivial effect. Yellow for an effect you should be aware of, but that isn't likely to be a red light. Orange for a mod that has a significant impact on the fight, and then red for ones, you'll see one down here, Punishing, Physical Reflect. red is one that you absolutely need to seriously consider whether or not to run that map at all. So, for the Chimera, the Phoenix, and the Hydra, this makes the boss more likely to be able to apply damage to you. It's also a bit of a strategy wrecker. If you're a build that relies upon totems, or especially a small number of minions, then chaining is really bad news. There are some countermeasures you can take. You can desummon your golems, and you can choose not to summon any totems, and especially not decoy totems, in the boss fight. You can go in solo only, even if you're in a group. If your build revolves around golems, totems, or something like that, then your only real countermeasure is to basically keep circling both the boss and all of your totems. So summon your totems or your minions as close to the boss as possible, and try to do a wide circle around both. If you're a minion build, however, a dedicated minion build that has lots and lots and lots of minions, you can usually get away with it. The reason for that is that there's just too many targets and too few chains for the boss's projectile skills to really just slaughter you. Otherworldly, this is the Beyond mod. It's a population mod. It affects the trash only. It doesn't do anything else. Twinned can't be rolled on any of the Guardian maps. Splitting. Splitting is a damage application mod. It gives 2 more projectiles to monsters. Does nothing on the Minotaur. Doesn't do much on the Chimera. It's not quite nothing. It does make the Chaos Spitter a little bit more dangerous, but it's not very bad. On the Hydra, it makes his barrage much more dangerous. Her barrage is really deadly with this. 2 more projectiles on her barrage means that it just does more damage, and as a result, you absolutely need to dodge it. You already need to dodge the Hydra's barrage. It's probably already going to kill you if it hits you, but this just seals the deal. You're not surviving a hit from Hydra barrage if there is additional projectiles on the map. However, the barrage is easy to dodge. For the Phoenix, it's much worse. This is actually a bit of a build wrecker in disguise. Energy shield builds are really hampered on the Phoenix by this mod. And that's because the little birdies that spawn during the Phoenix fight, that spawn in increasing and increasing numbers over time, they will abuse the splitting mod because they will fire 3 projectiles instead of 1. And that means you're not going to be able to dodge them all. They're going to be hitting you, they're going to be igniting you, and as a result, your energy shield is not going to be recharging very effectively. Consequentially, if you're an energy shield build, fear this mod a little bit on Phoenix. It's not an absolute you can't do the map, but it's one that you need to respect. Life regeneration will help a lot if you're, and because you're just going to be taking a lot more small hits on the Phoenix. Otherwise, this isn't a nightmare mod by any means, but it is an impactful one. Abhorrent is another population mod. Unstoppable is the no slow and no taunt mod. It's a bit of a strategy wrecker, but it's only really impactful in my opinion on the Minotaur. So the effects that are wrecked by it are Decoy Totem and Temporal Chains based defenses. You can use Enfeeble as a weaker alternative to Temporal Chains if your white slots allow. Alternately, you just have to move faster out of the Minotaur's big hits. Conflagrating. This is the mod that causes every enemy hit to ignite. It's a combo mod. It doesn't do very much on its own. On the Phoenix, it does have a bit of an impact. However, Minotaur for the Minotaur, if the combo is actually effective, so that means that the Minotaur has been granted fire damage by some other source. On that boss, it's absolutely savage to have this mod. His ignites are very big. If he hits you with one of his biggest swings, you're going to be burning for a long time and for a lot of damage. The Chimera, it's pretty scary as well. If you're set alight by one of his hits, then you are going to be burning for a while, and that's really bad during the smoke phase. Phoenix already is able to deal fire damage, and so this means that you're going to be that when you're hit by his attacks, you're going to be burning for a while. And when you hit by Hydra, again, if she's got the ability to deal fire damage, she's going to hurt you bad. This is a mod that you want to be very careful about running in conjunction with the fire damage mod. So that is the burning prefix. It synergizes with both burning and also with deadliness, the crit intensity mod. You should be concerned if you have both conflagrating and burning or conflagrating of deadliness, but you can still run them. It's just more important than ever to play tight and not make any mistakes on the boss. Hex Proof. Hex Proof prevents you cursing monsters unless you have a way of bypassing it. It's a strategy wrecker. It's nastier on the Minotaur again because anything that prevents Temporal Chains is a bit nastier on the Minotaur. That's because the Minotaur has more one-shots than the other bosses do. So this wrecks Temporal Chains and Enfeeble-based defenses, and it can be a meaningful indirect hit point multiplier. If you've been using a curse like Flammability or Elemental Weakness or Despair to lower the monster's resistances, then suddenly you're going to find that's not working, and so the monster has more resistances than it would otherwise have, which is equivalent to having more hit points. The Cosprey's Will Chest is an option as a countermeasure, but it's not usually worth it. Simply not getting hit is often the best way, but again, that can be more easily said than done, especially when you're learning the fights. Unwavering. Unwavering gives the monsters more hit points and immunity to stun, and it's a durability mod. As far as the build wrecker side of things goes, only stunlock builds, which are not really popular at all at the moment. You want to be conscious of how many durability mods stack up. Durability modifiers are more multipliers for time to kill, which means there's more time to make mistakes, and there's more time to get overwhelmed by the Phoenix's adds. This is the smallest of the durability mods. There's a lot of worse ones. Armored is next. Armored is the second worst of the durability mods, although it doesn't apply to every build. 40% physical resistance. This is horrible if you're a pure physical build. This is a massive multiplier to the monster's hit points. It is considerably more significant than Fecund when we get to that. Do not underestimate this mod. It is the second worst durability mod. It stacks scarily with all other durability mods, but most of all, it stacks with the one that grants endurance charges. If you roll both armored and of endurance on a map, you need to be very careful if you are playing, say, something like a physical cycloner that uses brutality. You could be in for a lot of trouble there. Fecund. Fecund is the big life mod. It's a durability mod. It's weaker than armored, but it works for all characters. It does the same thing, and again, it scales nastily with other durability mods. Savage. Savage is a damage multiplier. 22 to 25% increased enemy damage. That doesn't sound like much, especially when we get to Burning, Freezing, and Shocking, which are going to come up, and they're in the 90 to 110% range. However, this is unmitigated damage, and then it stacks multiplicatively with every other damage mod. This is actually quite a scary mod. Do not underestimate it. It scales very nastily with any other damage mods that are on the map. Next we have Burning, Freezing, and Shocking, which are the 90 to 110% of damage added as extra fire, cold, and electricity, respectively. These are fairly scary mods, but not as bad as Savage, and they synergize nastily with other damage mods, specifically Exposure and Empowered for all of them, and Conflagrating for the Ignites. Conflagrating only applies to Burning. Next we have Fleet, which is the most dangerous of the damage application mods for the map, but the second most dangerous for the boss. Fleet makes everything faster that your enemies do. I really want to say don't underestimate this mod. The numbers on it are high. It gives monsters movement speed, attack speed, and cast speed. Having your movement speed be greater than the enemy is one of the strongest defenses in Path of Exile, and it's one of the most easily underrated because it doesn't sort of show up on your character sheet. However, being able to get the fuck out of danger before the danger comes to you is the biggest defense that your character has. Every character relies on it. Even the most brick tanked of Juggernauts relies on the ability to get the hell out of massive slam attacks that are telegraphed. Fleet removes your ability to do that. Fleet means you have less time to react to your enemy's wind-up attacks, and that you are just in general in more danger than you otherwise would be. So, this mod is scary. It stacks with all other damage and speed mods, and do not underestimate it. But Punishing and Mirrored, which are physical and elemental reflect respectively, these are just pure strategy wreckers. They ruin the day of all physical damage builds, including minions, and then all elemental damage, including minions, respectively. Do not run these if you have non-token damage of that type. Take a lot of care if you have token amounts of damage. So what I mean by that, I'm playing in the Blight League at the moment. I'm playing a Fireball character. The Fireball character primarily deals damage with Ignites, so it's damage over time, which is not able to be reflected. However, just the initial hit of my fireballs does about 15,000 damage. If I throw a fireball into a pack of monsters when I've got the mirrored map mod on, even though I'm only doing 15,000 damage to each of them, and only 18% of that's getting reflected to me, so 2,400, I'm often hitting 6 or 8 monsters at a time. And even through my capped fire resistance, that can be enough to kill me. If I hit 6 or 8 monsters, I'm in trouble. If I hit 20 monsters, I'm dead. So you'll already know by the time that you've gotten up to the Guardians whether or not you can do these mods. Sextants can mitigate these mods for players, but will not mitigate it for minions. So if you've got a Sextant mod that says players cannot take reflected damage, you can run these maps that you may have rolled up earlier, but your minions will still die like popcorn. Oh, they'll just pop like popcorn. Totems can do this mod sometimes, and they can cheese it a bit. So you can cast a totem, let the totem, set off, say, a fire blast or whatever skill it uses, and then die horribly afterwards. But that is a clumsy and slow way to do these maps. So, broad rule of thumb: never run a punished or mirrored map if you deal non-trivial amounts of that damage type, and respect the mod, even if you're an elemental damage build that just happens to do a little bit of physical damage because you're using a thicket bow, and all of the scaling that you've got is on the elemental damage, but you've still got just that little bit of base damage that the thicket bow does. Even then, you need to respect this mod. That said, by the time you've gotten up to the Guardians, you undoubtedly already know that. You've probably died to this mod exactly once and learnt your lesson. Overlords, boss speed and damage. So this is really scary with the Minotaur, because that boss has a lot of capacity to one-shot. This turns his slam attacks and his burrow attacks from probable one-shots into very likely one-shots, and also makes you have less time to react to them. This is basically all of Savage against the boss, and Savage is a scary mod on its own, and in addition to that, it is most of the effective fleet. This is also a situation where there is escalating returns. If you have both the Overlords mod and fleet, then they will add up to be worse than the sum of the parts. So respect these mods. This is a really terrifying mod. Titans. Titans increases boss area of effect and life. And so it's a durability and a damage application mod. Against the Minotaur and the Phoenix, this is quite worrying. On the Minotaur, this makes his rockfall cover more and more area. The more area that the rockfall covers, the more danger you're in. On the Phoenix, the ability that the boss has, where he looks like he's constipated for a couple of seconds, then he lets out a massive explosion. That suddenly covers a lot more of the arena than it otherwise would. And that is actually a one-shot, that skill usually. I believe from memory that it deals about 30,000 fire damage raw. So if you've got, you'll have your 75% fire resistance. So that's 7,500 fire damage, and then it inflicts a significant ignite on top of that. So it's not like it's a completely unsurvivable attack. There are plenty of ways you can build your character so that you'll survive that. But the best way to survive the Phoenix's ability is to dodge it, and Titans makes it harder to dodge. Against the Chimera and the Hydra, all this really is a monster increased life mod. AoE is a little bit impactful on the Chimera, but not very, because the attacks that he has that have AoE are pretty easily dodged anyway. This combos nastily with the other AoE mod, which is of Giants, and it also combos with Fleet and Overlords because those mods reduce your ability to, they reduce the time you've got to dodge, and then Titans takes away your ability to dodge as well. So those are some nasty combinations you want to watch out for. Next up we have Hex Watered, 60% less effectiveness of curses. So this is, again, it's a strategy wrecker. It undermines Temporal Chains and Enfeeble-based defenses and is a small indirect hit point multiplier. It's weaker than Hex Proof, but you can't bypass it with cost breeze. Generally speaking, I just treat this as a pretty easy mod. However, on the Minotaur, you kind of want to respect it, at least if you're using Temporal Chains or Enfeeble. Empowered. Empowered gives a 20% chance for monsters to land elemental ailments on you, so that is Freeze, Shock, Chill, and Ignite when they hit you with elemental damage. It's a combo mod. It doesn't do all that much on its own. In fact, against the Phoenix, it may cause you to be ignited. But against the others, because they deal mostly physical damage, I think Hydra does some cold, but Hydra's her attacks that hit you, most of them are most of them will be more problematic than just the cold damage. Like the getting chilled or frozen by them isn't the end of the world. It's the raw damage that you're taking from the Hydra that's the problem. So most of them don't deal elemental damage on their own, but once they're given elemental damage by another source, such as burning, freezing, or shocking, then that can really hurt you. Now this is kind of nasty if you're a Flask Staff build. A lot of builds will have some degree of resilience against elemental ailments built into their flasks. So you might be using a flask of grounding, you might be using a flask of heat, you might be using a flask of dousing as ways to stop yourself from suffering these powerful ailments. Not every build will have all of these anti-ailment flasks, but you'll have a few of them. Empowered can really put those flasks to the test if you have them, especially because being a 20% chance to go off, it's not happening all the time, but it's happening quite a lot. It still is a pretty low impact mod, but it's something that you just want to be aware of, and particularly be conscious if there's a time where getting frozen or chilled would kill you, then, or at least would prevent you from getting away from an attack that would kill you, then at that point you definitely want to be using an off-heat flask proactively. Don't just hold off on your heat flasks to react. You want to use them proactively in that case. Next up we have Resistant. This is one of those mods that looks trivial and kinda isn't. It's a strategy wrecker and durability mod, and for elemental damage builds, this is a monster of this is an absolute monster of a mod. What it does, it gives monsters 40% elemental resistance and 25% chaos resist. By default, that's exactly what they have at the moment, the bosses. So the Minotaur, the Chimera, the Phoenix, and the Hydra, they all start with 40% LE resist and 25% chaos. So for chaos damage builds, this effectively increases the monster's life by 50% if you have no form of chaos penetration. That's pretty worrying, but it's not as bad as it is for elemental builds. They're going from taking 60% of base damage to taking 25%, because they cap at 75%, the same way that we do. That is a massive increase in the amount of damage that you need to do to these bosses to kill them. If you have no elemental penetration, this is a plus 140% monster hit point roll. So for that reason, it's actually a really terrifying mod for some builds. So do not underestimate this at all. If you're a chaos build, it's fecund. If you're not a chaos build, if you're an elemental build, it's much, much, much worse. This is one of the worst of the durability builds. It must be taken seriously if it affects you. Next up we have Impervious, which is a strategy wrecker and durability mod, but one that doesn't affect most people. 65% avoidance against bleed, blind, and poison for enemies. Now, this is a mongrel bastard if you're a poison build. If you're a poison build, this is as bad as Resistant. Maybe it is for elemental builds, maybe even worse. So consider it to be an orange and borderline red if you're a poison build. Blind is also a relevant defensive layer, and if you rely on it, watch out and upgrade this mod to yellow. For bleed builds, this is just a mere nuisance, probably just a yellow mod, because it means you take more wind-up time to start dealing damage, but because only the best 1 or 8 bleeds that you inflict on an enemy at a time count, it's actually not all that bad, because they're already going to be taking you'll already be taking bleed damage, so it won't matter very much. Bloodlines is a pure population mod, no effect. Venom is a low impact damage mod. Balance gives it elemental equilibrium. This is a strategy wrecker for single element builds. It's fecund level or worse for some builds, but trivial for most. And you'll know whether or not it affects you. Just treat it as a nasty, nasty durability mod if you're not able to deal with it. Now we have the skirmishing, which is just free pack size. Grants point blank. Even if you're an archer, this is often an upside. If it's not an upside, it's not too bad. Now we have the interesting ones, the ones that grant monsters charges. Frenzy, Endurance, and Power. These give the enemies Frenzy, Endurance, and Power charges respectively on hit, who would have guessed. Monsters get massively increased effective charges compared to players. So, the effect of 3 Frenzy charges on monsters is 12% more damage, 45% increased attack speed, and 15% move speed. This is really scary. This is Fleet, the Fleet mod, just with less movement speed. It's something you should be really scared of, and it combos worryingly well with Fleet and Overlords. Endurance is the most significant durability mod, bar none, for physical and elemental damage builds. I don't believe it does anything for chaos damage builds. What it does is it gives 45% physical mitigation. So remember how nasty Armored was with 40%? Well, this is worse. And 45% to all elemental resistances. It's not immediate. The monster has to land 3 hits first, but they'll get that quickly, and then they'll keep those charges. One countermeasure you've got, there are some abilities that allow you to steal charges from enemies, so if you're using one of them, then great. But if you're not, then you're just going to have to count on doing a lot more damage than you would otherwise need to do. Do not underestimate this mod. You should fear it. It is the most significant single durability mod. And it's particularly nasty on the Phoenix, where it can cause the Phoenix's last 20% of health, which is when the most birds are active and the most fire resistance suppression is effective to the player. It can make that fight much longer. So, yeah, do not underestimate this mod. It's scary. Power charges are a damage mod, and they increase monster crit chance from 5% to 35% once the monster has its full collection of 3 power charges. This is nasty, but it's not devastatingly so. Keep in mind with all of these 3 mods, one thing you can sometimes do is kite the boss around until the charges fall off. Charges will fall off bosses after about 10 seconds, same as they will for players. So if you can just kite the boss around not taking any hits, then that's a way of mitigating these nasty mods. But they are very, very, very nasty. They also stack in nasty ways as well. As we said, Frenzy stacks with Fleet and Overlords. Endurance stacks with Armored really badly, or with the Resistant mod. And Power stacks with Of Deadliness for more crits. The suffixes that are, for other suffixes, we have Of Giants, which is 100% increased AoE. As far as damage application goes, this is terrifying on the Minotaur, it's a nuisance on the Chimera, and the Phoenix and the Hydra, it's irrelevant. So, why it's nasty on the Minotaur? 100% is actually a lot, and this means that the Minotaur's rockfalls can cover more and more and more of the arena. The more of the arena that's covered with the rockfalls, the less places you have to safely dodge when the Minotaur does his burrow attack. If you get in real trouble in this regard, if the Minotaur starts covering most of the floor space of the arena with his rockfalls, then what you can do is zap around to the other side of the donut, of the entire donut from the Minotaur, using some sort of move skill that teleports through any of the lightning beams that are active, and just wait. Listen carefully. You need to be listening to see if the Minotaur is actually coming towards you, and if he doesn't, then you'll just be able to wait, and any rockfalls that are within about a screen and a half of your character, their time will eventually elapse. So, next up we have Of Deadliness, which is crit multi and crit chance for monsters. This is a damage mod, and it's scarier than it looks. Firstly, it turns some Minotaur hits from 2 shots into 1 shots, and it combos nastily with all damage mods, so don't underestimate it. We have Smothering next, which is minus 60% to regeneration of life, mana, and energy shield. So it's a debuff mod. I feel this is nastiest on the Chimera. It's pretty trivial on Minotaur, Phoenix, and Hydra, where most of your recovery will come from other sources. But on the Chimera, there's a phase when the Chimera hides off, and there's a few smoke clouds, and you've got basically anywhere from 2 to 4 seconds during which the Chimera is just hitting you relentlessly while you try to find him in one of those smoke clouds. During that phase, losing 60% of your life regen is really nasty. This also is a bit of a build wrecker if you're a build that is tight on mana. So, this combos nastily with damage mods, especially in the Chimera fight, and is just generally not a nice mod. It feels a bit clunky while you're running the map itself. But you'll be able to manage it. Minotaur, Phoenix, and Hydra, I think you can just treat this as it's not completely free increased quantity, but it's fairly close to it. Next up, we have the 4 mods that put shit on the ground: Flames, Ice, Lightning, and Desecration. These can all largely be ignored. They're just not very relevant. The one that you should be a bit careful of for 2 of these fights, so for the Flames are nasty on the Chimera, because during the smoke phase, if you're an energy shield reliant build, then you're going to end up walking over some of these flames during that period, which is going to reduce your ability to regenerate your energy shield. And Lightning is nasty on the Minotaur because it will turn some 2-shots into 1-shots. Ally weakness. We have a bunch of curses now. For all the curses, you can mitigate them by using a long-lasting warding flask. I like using an eternal mana flask that is enduring, so it's got the mod that makes them that reduces the duration 25%, but causes it to not be removed from your character when you're at full mana. That mod's only available on mana flasks and not on life flasks. But if you're not using a mana flask, which a lot of builds obviously aspire not to have to use one, then you can stick this on a long-lasting or low charge consumption utility flask. Popular choices there: the Stibnite flask is very popular. The Jade flask is also quite popular if your build wants to use either of those. So the warding suffix on one of those flasks is great. Elemental weakness is a debuff and damage mod. It's nastier on the Phoenix and Hydra, which deal non-physical damage, and it also does scale a little bit with damage as element mods. Vulnerability is terrifying on the Minotaur. Absolutely terrifying. The reason for that is that it makes the Minotaur hit you harder, again, turning some 2-shots into 1-shots. But also, in the Minotaur fight, you're going to be spending a good deal of time running away from the boss's attacks. He has a lot of slow, wind-up attacks that do devastating damage. If you get hit during that period, either by the Minotaur's attacks or by one of the Earth Elemental's attacks, and they inflict a bleed on you, you're going to be taking a lot of damage while you run away. So for that reason, I've actually marked it as a red on the Minotaur. It's something you need a plan to deal with the vulnerability curse on that map. Chimera, I've put it as an orange because it's really deadly during the smoke cloud phase, especially because of how tense that phase can be. You're running around like a chicken that's been decapitated, and you're taking hits left, right, and center, and you're bleeding, and oh my god, I'm losing blood, blah, 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 blah. It's quite scary. Phoenix and Hydra just doesn't really do very much. Enfeeblement is a durability-oriented debuff curse. It means that you hit less hard, you deal less damage than you would otherwise deal, and it's not all that nasty. It's something that when you've got clear uptime for attacking the boss, you can just hit one of your warding flasks and go to town on them as though this mod didn't exist. So it's not terrible, and numerically it's just not as bad as the endurance charge mod is for monster durability. However, on the Phoenix, any durability mod can be a little bit nasty on the Phoenix at times. Next up, we have Temporal Chains. Temporal Chains is a debuff and damage application curse. Damage application, of course, because by slowing you down, it reduces your ability to outrun your enemies, both their skills and their movement. However, it's more easily mitigated than the Fleet mod. So it's weaker than Fleet because of that reason, but it does fundamentally the same thing. Warding Flask will help you here. It makes dodging 1-shots harder, but again, not as bad as Fleet. It does stack nastily with Fleet and Overlords, however. We have Stasis next, which is a debuff. It is a complete build wrecker. This is the one that is 0 regen. Many builds can't do this at all, and I'm sure that you know if you can't do a Stasis mod by now. Mana Flask is a countermeasure. Portaling out for Flask charges is a countermeasure. Mana Leech and Life Leech, however, are the main available countermeasure here. Exposure reduces your maximum resistances. It's a combo mod and a damage mod. It doesn't really do anything on the Minotaur and the Chimera on its own, except for the Chimera's fire damage adds, and even then it's just not that significant. But for the Phoenix and the Hydra, it's a bit scarier because they do some elemental damage. It's actually worse on the trash than it is on the bosses, in my opinion. but it does combo nastily with plus elemental damage mods. Congealment is no leech. This is a build wrecker. Most builds actually don't really care about this, but it is an absolute red. It's an absolute red because for some builds, this is a complete map killer. Mana Flask, portaling out for charges, and life regen are some of your options here, but you will know if you can't do a map of congealment, you can't do it. Insulation is 90% elemental element avoidance. This is a build wrecker. Most builds don't care about it, but certain builds, such as Ignite builds and builds that rely on freeze as a defensive layer, hate it. If you are an Ignite build, do keep moving and keep casting spells or attacking because you will land an Ignite eventually, and this stacks nastily with Resistant. Toughness reduces your critical strike multiplier and is a durability mod. It's something that is an effective durability mod if you're playing a crit build, and it's pretty irrelevant if you're not. But the numbers are pretty low. If you're actually playing a crit build, I'd upgrade this from green to yellow, but even then, it's just a yellow durability mod. It's not something that's particularly scary. Drought is a debuff, minus 50% to your flask charge gain. It's more impactful on the Minotaur because I find that fight to be the most flasks charge starved of the various fights. Your mileage may vary there. The numbers are pretty low though. It's only 50% reduced flask charges. If it was 75%, I think it would be considerably worse. Rust. Rust reduces your chance to block and your armor. It's a build wrecker that does very little for most builds. In fact, for most builds it's a green, but for gladiators in particular, this is a absolute nightmare bastard mod. For gladiators, whose primary defensive layer is often block, this means that they've gone from being, from walking through everything feeling indestructible to ouch, 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 I'm getting hit, I'm getting hit, I'm getting hit. If you're playing a gladiator build, you will know that you'll know how scary this mod is to you. It's pretty damn nasty, but if you're not playing a gladiator, you can completely ignore it. Miring is a mod that I want to point out. This is a lot nastier than people think it is. So this is the mod that gives 50% accuracy and makes your dodge chance unlucky. This is a build wrecker, but the only build it really affects is raiders. Raiders that stack both evasion and dodge as defensive layers. Now I put together some stats on what your chance to evade is at various evasions. 680 is the monster level 83 accuracy, and 1040 is the accuracy the monster has in a map of miring. So you'll see that you're going from 65% chance to be hit to 76, 49 to 61, 40 to 52, 34 to 45, 30 to 41, 25 to 34, 21 to 29. So that's going up considerably. So your evasion is getting quite a bit worse. And on top of your evasion getting worse, in addition to that, you're also facing your dodge chance being unlucky. If you're a raider, you've got quite a bit of dodge probably. You may even be stacking it as your primary defensive layer. It is quite possible for your character to go from only getting hit 20% of the time, from only beating your evasion layer 20% of the time, and then only beating your dodge layer 30% of the time. So you're getting hit 6% of the time originally. Suddenly, you're beating your evasion layer 30% of the time, and you're beating the dodge layer 59. You're basically taking about 5 times as much damage. So for that reason, this is a really dangerous mod if you're a raider. It is the single worst damage mod for those builds. However, for everyone else, it's just a green mod. It's free, increased item quantity, and so yeah, you can just ignore this one. Last and close to least, we have Impotence, which is neg 25% AoE. It's a debuff, but it just doesn't do very much. The numbers are so low that it's very manageable. So that is everything that I've got to say about the map mods. There's a lot in there, and the spreadsheet that I've been discussing there will be posted on a website that I'll put a link to. If you've got any questions, definitely fire away below. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it there, and hopefully this will make the individual boss discussions a little bit quicker than they otherwise would have been.